Welcome, friends, to episode 346 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm writer Luke Elliott.
And I'm filmmaker James Bailey.
And this week we sit down for a creative conversation with author Edward Ashton. So, Edward Ashton is the author of 6 novels, including Mickey 7, which was adapted into the film Mickey 17, and its sequel, Antimatter Blues, as well as numerous short stories. He's also a scientist, engineer, cancer researcher, and educator. Welcome to the show, Ed.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity.
So we had some correspondence about you potentially coming on because we were talking about your background and some of this other stuff, and you were saying it's kind of interesting what you can learn on the internet, huh?
Yeah, it was interesting for me hearing somebody sort of sum up my life with bits and pieces that have been gleaned, and it's interesting what you found and what you missed, and what was a little right and what was a little wrong. It was a fun exercise for me to listen to.
Well, we appreciate you coming on to put everything straight.
Yeah, exactly. Now's your chance to fix anything we might have gotten wrong. I'm curious because it's all pretty vague, right? But it says cancer researcher, engineer, scientist, educator. How does that all work? Is this all stuff you're actively working in?
Yeah. So cancer research is that's my job. That's what I do for a living. I've been in this field for 25 years now. I founded a biotech company 25 years ago, which has since gone through multiple acquisitions. I'm now part of a much bigger organization. I'm part of a 44,000 person company that's based in Dublin. But I'm still doing basically the same work, which is working on developing new therapies for different types of cancer and testing them and making sure that they do what they're supposed to do. So the rest of it falls more into the hobby space. The educator thing, I teach a lecture series every year at the University of Rochester on magnetic resonance physics. That's mostly just a favor that I do for my old advisor. He's got this course to teach to his graduate students, and he doesn't particularly like that section. It's tricky and technical, and so I handle it for him. I don't get paid for it or anything. It's just something that I do as a hobby.
It's awesome. So you said specifically you founded this company in biotech. What is it that the company does, I guess? And what, I know we don't want to get necessarily too technical, and this is about your writing, but I'm just curious because I lost someone very close to me to a glioblastoma. So when I saw that you were working in that space, I was very interested in exactly what you do there.
So we run clinical trials. We execute clinical trials. I'm an imaging specialist myself. So we run the imaging portion of the trials. We work with, we're working with 6,000 sites around the world right now. I'm currently supervising 400 different clinical trials in different areas. We do a lot of work in glioblastoma. It's a tough disease. I'm very sorry for your loss. But it is an area where we're making good progress. We actually just got a drug approved in pediatric glioblastoma about a year and a half ago that really had some pretty revolutionary results. There are several hundred kids who are alive right now who would not have been alive if we hadn't done this work, and that's something that helps get me out of bed every morning. That's something that gives you a reason to go to work. It's a little better than if I were selling widgets or soda pop or something like that.
Yeah, and it seems like it's a more maybe more directly rewarding than art can sometimes be, where that's something that I do is I write.
You mean because I get a regular paycheck? Yes.
Yeah,
I appreciate
that too.
It's nice. Yes, that's a big difference between writing and that is that I know how much I'm going to get paid and I know when I'm going to get paid. That makes a big difference
for sure. But also, like you don't know the effect your stories are going to have on people, right? Like it's kind of it's through different layers and. Maybe you affect people's lives, but it's all sort of non-specific ways, right? Whereas you get to see a direct evidence of someone surviving from a disease. So that's amazing that you get to do both of those things. I'm jealous of that.
Well, I appreciate that. I've been very lucky in my life.
For anyone listening that may not have seen the show before, what we do around here is we talk about adaptations, book to film adaptations. We like to give the same amount of weight to the source material and then also the adaptation. We covered Mickey 7 and Mickey 17, I think in March of this year. And we like to start off these creative conversations here, which is where we have someone who's had their work adapted come on and talk about it, with an icebreaker. And our icebreaker is, what is your favorite adaptation and what do the best adaptations offer that makes them worthwhile?
So that's an interesting question. When you say favorite adaptation, we all have our definitions of what we mean by favorite and what we think is good or bad. For me, I try to weigh things relative to the book. So I'm going to give you what I believe is the best movie relative to the source material, and that's going to be Stardust. I don't know if you're familiar with that film.
Yeah.
Star Claire Danes came out, I don't know, probably 15 years ago now.
About 2007, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's based on, of course, a Neil Gaiman novel of the same title, and it's very rare for me that I really feel that a movie is better than the book, better than the source book. I'm a literature person. That's my first love. But Stardust is one example where the movie is clearly superior to the book. I mean, and the book is good too. But if you read the book, the plot really loses the track a little bit in the third act. And the movie makers clearly saw that and took it in a little bit of a different direction that really wrapped things up in a much more satisfying way, in my opinion. Even aside from that, it's a brilliant movie. It's really fun to watch. So I highly recommend it.
That's awesome. We have tackled several Neil Gaiman pieces in the past. We haven't done that one. I don't know if he's an author we're going to return to, considering some of the recent things that came out about him.
That's problematic as well.
Which is a shame because it was work that I enjoyed, but obviously important for that stuff to come out.
Yeah, we did have Stardust on our list for
we had it on our list
the entirety of the podcast, like about a decade now. So we didn't get to it.
But that's interesting. You talk about it being potentially better and that making it a favorite, because some people, it's really more about just like how faithful it is, right? But we've had a few authors on now who talk about places where the adaptation kind of brings something special to it in and of itself. And that's interesting to me as we think about Mickey 7 and Mickey 17, because this is another one where, in some ways faithful, in some ways big changes were made, and it'll be interesting to kind of touch in on those. But before we get to the movie, in true ink to film form, I want to start with the book itself and talk about where this idea came from. So you're working in your field, you're dealing with imaging, and when I hear that, I immediately think about Mickey being printed out. I want to go ahead and give a spoiler warning for people who are listening. We are going to get into spoilers for both the book and the movie. Pretty much the whole thing could be spoiled. So this is going to be better to listen to or after you've seen the movie at least or read the book. Just be aware. So yeah, I'm seeing Mickey 17 being printed out. It's a very medical focused version of immortality, I guess. And I'm curious, is this image of the cloning sort of, I think you called it elsewhere, like a bad version of immortality. Is this the idea that was the seed for this story, or did it begin somewhere else?
So the seed for the story came from two different places, and this is pretty typical of my work, my writing. I usually start with first some weird obsession that I have personally, and for me, that's the teletransport paradox. That's something it's a philosophical problem that goes back to the 1750s. It's something that philosophers have been chewing over for a long time with no satisfactory resolution. It's something that's bothered me since I was a little kid. The first time I was watching Star Trek and I saw somebody get on the transporter pod, and they're treating it like this is a transportation device, and it's very clear to me that this is a murder machine and that they're getting on this thing. Like, I saw that guy dissolve. That looked really painful. Like, I would never in a million years do that.
Okay. I was going to ask you specifically if you would ever do it, but
no, absolutely not. And there's so much. This is a theme that comes up on over in science fiction. You see, books and movies where people are doing basically this. So whether it's a transported beam of some sort, teleporting, or like what happens with Mickey, where you're like, you die and you print a new body, whatever, and it seems like everybody just assumes, well, that's just you. You've gone on and you're immortal, and I don't know that I believe that that's true. I think personally, I lean more towards the idea that there's just some other guy who looks like me and is getting his grubby hands all over my stuff. And that's a philosophical problem that I wanted to chew over. And then I usually also have an image that's a touchstone when I start on any new piece, whether it's a short story or a novel. And for me, that image was another thing that had been stuck in my head for a little while, which was this idea of being hurt and trapped at the bottom of a crevasse. I used to do a lot of rock climbing. And so the idea of being like hurt at the bottom of a cliff or something and no one can help me. And that's something that has run through my mind a lot. And this particular image of someone at the bottom of this icy crevasse, no way out, no help for him, and he's just stuck there, had been stuck in my head, and so I wrote a little 500 word scene about that was basically just his internal dialogue, and that little 500 word scene is now basically the first couple of pages of the novel Mickey 7, and so that's really where it all came from.
So I know you write short stories as well, and I'm curious, at first did you conceive of this as something shorter and then it grew into a longer piece? I just feel that happens with me a lot, where I think something's a short piece and then I go to write it and go, oh no, this is actually much longer than I thought.
This particular piece, and this is not typical for me, usually I start out with a plan and I stick to the plan. But in this case, this piece went through several evolutions where it started out, yeah, you're exactly right. I thought I was going to write a short story. And I did write a short story, and that short story ended with Mickey getting shoved out of the tunnel mouth by the creepers. And it was about 5,000 words, which is kind of an awkward length for a short story if you want to sell it anyway. And I thought, that's not really an ending. Like, nothing's really resolved. And so I thought, well, maybe this isn't really a short story. Maybe this is a novella. So I kept working on it and expanded and grew. And I wound up with about a 25,000 word novella, which was a very dark, strange little novella. And I gave it to my agent, and he was in touch with Nava Wolf, who was an editor of Penguin at the time, and she liked it. He was interested. She was interested. But one of the first things she said was, like, I like the concept, I like the writing. I can't sell a novella. What am I supposed to do with this? This is a really hard. That's a tough length to market. Do you think this is a novel, actually? And I thought about it, and like, yeah, okay, maybe it is.
And this was pretty recent, right? Like, this was only a few years ago.
This would have been early 2019.
Yeah, so not that long ago.
6 years ago, yeah.
Yeah. I know novellas are starting to become more of a thing nowadays where people are starting to be able to sell them, but I think it's always going to be like, this would maybe work better if it was a novel.
Yeah, I think they, they work pretty well in kind of ebook format. I know, Martha Wells obviously has had huge success with the Murderbot series. I know Adrian Tchaikovsky has had pretty good success selling novellas. I think he works with Solaris and a couple other publishing houses. Tor.com obviously is a market for those. But I think at that time that was all just kind of getting geared up. This was pre-Murderbot. This was pre the success of some of these more commercially viable novellas. And so obviously I'm very happy that she gave me that advice, because things have worked out pretty well for this as a novel. I don't know if it would have worked out so well as a novella. Yeah,
that was my follow-up is like, do you feel like this is its best length? Like the things that you ended up adding, did it really bring this story to life in a way that led to this becoming, I think, going to be your most well-known piece, at least for now, with this major adaptation that happened?
I think it added a lot of depth to the piece. It really, the novella was just a gloss. In 25,000 words, there's only so much you can say, and it was a lot more surface level. Taken to novel length allowed me to dig deeper on a lot of these questions, and I think it really improved the overall quality of the work.
I like a lot of the heady sci-fi topics that come into the story for Mickey 7, and I'm curious, like, was there anything specific that you felt that you needed to research, and like, what is your outlook and your process for getting into research and not getting bogged down in it and finding things that are going to help elevate a story?
Well, I mean, I don't do a ton of research because I'm kind of an obsessive nerd and I already know a lot of stuff.
Right. Nice.
I teach quantum physics, right? So I know that stuff pretty well. I've got a pretty good grounding in engineering and physics. When there are bits and pieces of it that I'm not, or a little fuzzy on, or not quite as sure about, I can do a little digging, and I know where in the primary literature to go to dig up the specific numbers. So, for instance, in the book, I have the little bit about the bullet that's used to take out Alan Manikova's planet. I did have to do some research to figure out exactly, given the velocity I was proposing and the mass of the object, how many actual megajoules would we be imparting to the biosphere, and what effects would that actually have? I did a little digging on that to make sure I got those numbers right, because the last thing that I ever want is for a real physicist to read one of my books and call me out and say, "Hey, you blew the math." That's always embarrassing. So I don't ever want that to happen.
Well, I like to hear that you did your homework on that, and I do love that vignette, that story that you have inside of this is one of my favorite parts of this.
That's fun, right?
Yeah, it almost felt like it was its own thing, like its own little story within the story that was quite compelling. And I wondered if where was that developed when you were expanding it into a novel, or was that there from the novella length, or where did that come in?
No, that was one of the pieces that came in when as I was expanding it,
Yeah.
because I realized, and it's pretty obvious from the structure of the book why it had to be there. I needed a compelling reason why multiples were so reviled.
Yeah.
Why is it that you can't have two? Because if you think about it, there are some useful things that you could do if you could print out 3 or 4 of this guy, and maybe there's a job that takes 4 people that's going to get people killed. Why not have 4 of them? So I needed a pretty good compelling reason why this society would absolutely not permit that to happen, and so this kind of apocalyptic scenario where where this guy almost basically destroyed the universe was my way of explaining that.
I was a little disappointed at I mean, like, the version we get in the movie's fine. I just like the scope of what we got in the book was so fantastic. I was a little sad that it wasn't. I get why they probably didn't do it, but it was just such a fun part of the book that I kind of missed it in the film.
Well, in terms of the adaptation, that was one of the first things Director Bong and I talked about, was that he was going to need to pare down this universe I had built and make it narrower, have them coming from Earth, not from some far-flung colony, because there's just not enough room in a movie to build in all of that backstory and make it all comprehensible. Are you familiar with Night Flyers? Book by George R. R. Martin, was adapted.
Oh, okay, yeah. I was gonna say, I've heard the name. I've never seen it. Yeah.
Yeah, they did a very similar thing. Martin's universe that he built, and he did a series of novels and novellas in the 70s and 80s that had this sort of really intricate universe with the same thing, this sort of far-flung colony structure, and different colonies have different sort of mores and cultures. And when they adapted his work for film, they basically did the exact same thing. They compressed it all back down to Earth. Unfortunately, his work was a lot more dependent on that colony structure than mine was, and it really, I felt like it really hurt this story a lot, what they did. I thought Director Bong was much more successful in doing it with this book than they were.
I did particularly love in the book how it was like the people we were dealing with had such a negative view on Earth. And they were like, those fools. They couldn't stop squabbling amongst themselves. Like, they almost considered themselves like a separate, like, we're related to them, but like only distantly. And yeah, again, it doesn't make it into the movie, but that's a reason I think people can go seek out the book if you want to get to that stuff. I also felt like you dived into some of the philosophy behind that we've touched on a little bit here about like whether or not this is actually Mickey being printed, or is this a new person or a new version, and how we should feel about that. It was like more of an open question, whereas I felt like the movie was a little less interested in that element of it, and it kind of was just like a let's continue on with this concept, and it's baked in. I think it's baked into the film, but like, I don't know, it spent a little bit less time exploring those philosophical questions, I guess.
I think it's a difference of emphasis.
Right.
I was more interested in the philosophical side of things. Those are problems that obsess me and that I think about a lot. I think Director Bong was more interested in the political side of things. My book is not very political. It's very philosophical. The movie is not particularly philosophical. It's much more political. And that's just a matter of emphasis. And that's what, he has topics he wants to talk about. I had topics I wanted to talk about. And I think we both got our messages across.
I wanted to ask you about the character a little bit. So at some point you developed Mickey's voice, and my read of him in the book was that he was a bit of a fuck up. He's capable in his own way, but doesn't seem to think things through fully before getting into them. And then I felt like that thing I was picking up on is what really became the character in the film, who was much more of like the fuck up. And it was interesting sort of inversion of what you might expect from a character in a sci-fi film who a lot of them tend to be very capable. Your Mark Watney type who, maybe is cutting jokes, but is also like solving problems and like just very hyper capable. And that's not what Mickey is. And so I'm just curious, like, how you developed this character. Like, where does this personality come from?
Yeah, so it's always interesting to me when a critic really nails you between the eyes. There was a review of my newest book, The Fourth Consort, which started off with Edward Ashton has come up with yet another just some guy TM main character. Clearly he's in love with this type. And you know what? Boom. Absolutely. He got me. That's the sort of character I like. I understand some people prefer to have that kind of like heroic character, like as you say, Mark Watney. I don't remember the name of the guy from Project Hail Mary. Andy Weir likes these hyper competent heroic guys. To me, that's not as interesting. And I think it comes down to there was an essay that was flown around the internet a little while ago about Aragorn versus Boromir. And when you're a kid, you think Aragorn's the hero because he's hyper competent. He's always right. He knows exactly what's going to happen 2 steps ahead. He can defeat everyone in every battle and blah, 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 blah. And Boromir's just some guy. He didn't even want to be there. His dad made him go on this quest, right?
Not to mention, he you think for a little while he failed because he was tempted by the ring.
At the end of the day, even though he's just some guy, he steps up and he's the one who sacrifices his life for his friends. Aragorn doesn't. Aragorn becomes the king. He walks away with the beautiful girl and the crown on his head. Boromir's dead with 50 arrows in him because he sacrificed himself at the end of the day, even though he didn't have any superpowers. He doesn't have any great gifts or anything like that. He's just somebody who steps up and does what has to be done when it has to be done. And to me, that's a much more compelling character. And that's the kind of characters I try to write.
We definitely touched on the Boromir sort of justice because, like you said, as a kid, you gravitate towards the heroes, you gravitate towards the elves and the dwarves, but like men are a little boring. But as an adult, like I wouldn't even say as an adult, as I watched the movies and read the books more, I was like the tragedy of Boromir and like the fact that he is the guy who stood up is like really compelling stuff.
Yeah, some of the best moments from the Lord of the Rings. But let's shift back to Mickey 7. So you've written this book, delivered it to your agent. It seems like, from what I was reading, the adaptation process got started very early. Was it optioned before it came out? Am I remembering that correctly, or was it shortly? How did this happen?
I turned this book into my agent right before Christmas in 2019, December of 2019. He got back to me, I want to say January 12th of 2020, that Warner Brothers had optioned for film. It's not before it came out. We didn't have a publisher. We didn't have a contract. We had nothing. We had a PDF. That was it.
Is your agent a wizard?
I've asked many people that question. I've asked him that question, and he has neither confirmed nor denied it. I have no idea how he managed to pull this off, but he managed to pull this off. It was an impressive turn.
So you have no idea. Like, is this something that, like, because in theory, you're handing it to him. He should be shopping for a publisher, but I guess at the same time, he's sharing it with connections in the film industry. Like, how does this even get to Bong Joon-Ho?
He's covering all bases, and he was working with another gentleman who specializes in film rights stuff. And so the two of them were
scout kind of person.
No, he's a film rights agent.
Okay.
He's my film rights agent now, I guess.
Gotcha.
He has been for the last 6 years. So he was shopping around to publishers as well. Who were, prior to the option deal, kind of tepid on it. I should note that this was my third novel, and my first novel sold reasonably well. We sold about 10,000 copies in the first year of my first book, which is that's okay. My second book did not sell well at all. And I could come up with a number of different excuses for why that happened, but it doesn't really matter. It happened. And that makes it really tough on my agent to sell the next book because the assumption of every editor who looks at it is the same nobodies who lined up to not buy this book will not line up to not buy the next book that comes down the line too.
People call that the death spiral you can get into sometimes, right?
It's tough. It's a tough situation. And then, this thing with Warner Brothers came through, and it wasn't Warner Brothers per se. It was Plan B Entertainment, which is Brad Pitt and Jeremy Kleiner and Dee Gardner, their production company, who decided that this is something they wanted. And we signed the option deal. And once that happened, that obviously opened the doors with the publishers. Because if you can say Warner Brothers is interested in this, that gets the publishers much more interested as well. And that's things really started to steamroll after that.
I assume that the publishers were incredibly interested once the option came through, right?
We actually got a little bit of a bidding war. Yeah, it was really nice at that point. It was surprising how quickly that turned around. Yeah.
When did you find out that Bong Joon-Ho was going to be the one adapting this thing?
That was much later. When you sign an option, the first thing everybody tells you is cash the check and don't think about it ever again because it's not going to get produced. Right. If you talk to people in this space, Like I saw an interview with John Scalzi, and he was talking about Old Man's War, which of
Hmm.
course won the Hugo and the Nebula and been on the bestseller list for 10 consecutive years and blah, 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 blah. And it's been optioned 4 times and has never moved past the option stage. Um, and the interviewer asked him, like, are you bitter? Are you angry about this? And he said, no, what do you, this paid for my kid to go to college and it paid for this and it paid for that. Why would I be upset? This is how it goes. And that was sort of my expectation was, it was a nice check and I cashed the check and I didn't expect anything else to come from it. And then it was almost a year later, I was sitting at my breakfast table and my phone dinged. And I looked, it was a text from my agent. It just had a link and it said, click on this. I'm like, okay, I'm not an idiot. This is a phishing attack. I'm not clicking on that. And I thought about it. I'm like, it's Paul. Okay, fine. So I click and it's a link to a Deadline article saying that Bong Joon-Ho had signed on to direct and write for this project with my book. And my wife sitting across the table from me looked at me. The first thing she said was, oh my God, who died? I mean, because apparently like the blood just drained out of my face. And I had to explain, now this is a good cardiac arrest that I just experienced, not a bad one. It's all good. But yeah, that would have been, God, I want to say 2020, middle of 2021.
So how much of a film fan are you? Were you familiar with Bong's work?
I mean, I was very familiar with Parasite. Obviously, I'd seen Snowpiercer. I really loved Okja. Actually,
Yeah.
I still feel like Okja is my favorite of
I do think there's some similarities with this film here that we can talk about.
There are, yeah. There, a lot of the same themes. I wasn't as aware of his back catalog. Obviously, once I realized we were going to be working together, I went and watched all the rest of his films, and like he's, I don't have to say he's an absolutely brilliant filmmaker. A number of people have asked me, over the years, are you nervous about what's happening to your baby, what they're going to do with it? And the answer I've always given is, if it were some other director doing this, maybe I would have been nervous. But this is Bong Joon-Ho. No. I occasionally may have had some intrusive thoughts about me being the man who would destroy Bong Joon-Ho's career, but I never thought he'd be the man to destroy mine. That never crossed my mind.
Well, I think it turned out for the best for everyone.
I think so too. I don't think anybody's career got destroyed. I think it all worked out pretty well.
So when you heard that this was happening, and you this is a real thing, it's going to be made. Did you start to have parts of the book you were thinking about that were like, I really wish that they could nail this scene, but I'm worried they're not going to? Are there any like sticking points in there that you were particularly worried about?
Not really. I had before the script writing even began, I had about a 2-hour Zoom call with director Bong where we talked through what he was going to do with the script. And he did ask me at that time if that would, what I thought was the heart of the book and what needed to be in the film, so that it would still be my story. And he promised me that he would make sure that was there. And that was 100% something he did not have to do. He had absolutely no obligation to do that. That was purely a kindness offered from him to me. I thought about it for about 2 seconds and I said, chapter 19. Chapter 19 has got to be in there. If you don't remember, that's the chapter with the medical experiments where 3, 4, and 5 die in quick succession, and Nasha bullies her way into the isolation chamber and sort of cradles Mickey as he dies. And Director Bong said, I'm so glad you said that. I cried when I read that chapter. I was definitely going to put that in anyway. And I said, can I pick something else? And he said, no. That was the end of that discussion, and that was the end of my contribution to the script. But if you've seen the film, that scene is in there and it is very moving. And like, I cried watching that in the theater, even though I've read it a million times. And like, I can make myself tear up reading my own book, sometimes reading that chapter. So, to me, what this book is, what the movie is at the end of the day is the heart of it is the relationship between Mickey and Nasha, and the fact that you have this love that persists through death. It's horrible what happens to Mickey and what he has to go through. It's even worse what happens to Nasha. Having to watch someone you love die horribly is in many ways worse than having to go through it yourself, in my opinion. And Nasha has to go through that over and over again, just as Mickey has to go through dying over and over again. And the fact that their relationship doesn't just persist, but is strengthened every time this happens. That was something that I've observed in my life. When you go through a traumatic experience as a couple, it can either break you apart or it can cement you and draw you together. You really want to be on the other side of that. You want to be on the side where it makes you stronger than you were before. And that's what I wanted to illustrate. And that's a theme of the book. And Director Bong did, he really did carry that through in the movie as well. which I really appreciated.
Yeah, I love that part of both. And honestly, that gives me an opportunity to ask you about one of the differences I noticed. And maybe it's small, maybe it's not. I don't know. But in the book, uh, I believe, if I remember correctly, Mickey doesn't meet her, Nasha, until he's already a few versions in. It's like Mickey 3 or somebody who first meets her.
Correct.
And in the movie, it's Mickey Prime who meets her. So she's there from the beginning. And considering all the things we've just talked about, whether philosophically, is this actually Mickey or is this a copy? It's interesting that he chose to go with the latter instead of the former. And can you talk about your decision to go with the former, I guess, and why you had it be a later iteration of Mickey?
I wanted to start with a later iteration of Mickey because I wanted to make it clear that both Mickey and Nasha knew what they were getting into at the beginning.
Mm.
Nasha was aware at this time that he had already died twice. She knew what she was getting into, getting involved with this person. Whereas if I had started the relationship with Mickey 1, with Mickey Barnes, you could have thought that she thought she was just getting a regular boyfriend, and then, you know, like you thought you were marrying somebody who's who's going to be a millionaire, and then you find out later that they're actually broke or something like you could almost see that it was a bait and switch. But coming in at 3, if you remember in the book, she was actually peripherally involved in the incident that killed Mickey 1 and Mickey 2. So she's very well aware of what happened with them, and she chooses to get into this anyway. So I wanted to make it clear that she was coming into this with her eyes open.
Yeah. So you also, I thought, made a particular note of when the original Mickey dies. Because I think you think along the same ways I was thinking, which is that's the most important death, because that's the original Mickey dying. And if it sounds like you're on the same wavelength as me, in that these subsequent versions of Mickey aren't actually the same person. That's when our main character actually dies, right? And I rewatched the movie last night, and once again found it interesting how it's actually kind of hard to track where the first Mickey dies. In the film. And I'm pretty sure he dies to a test of this nerve gas, and it's revealed about halfway through the movie. And we've already seen Mickey die a bunch of times, but I'm pretty sure with the chronology, these are subsequent deaths and not the original death. But I'm actually not 100% certain. You've probably seen it a few times now. Do you have a sense of like when the original Mickey dies in the movie?
In the film, it is either, and you're right that it's not 100% clear. There's a test at the beginning where Gemma has Mickey put a gun to his head and pull the trigger. And in the book, the gun does not fire. And in the film, it is left very ambiguous because he puts the gun to his head and then there's the roar of the rocket lifting.
Oh.
And you don't actually know if the gun was fired or not. And I thought it implied that the gun actually was fired and he died there and then.
Maybe because I had the book version in my head, I assumed it did not fire in the film as well.
Yeah, like I said, you don't see his brain splattered on the wall or anything.
Right.
But the implication to me was that the gun fired. And if
it would
not,
kind of make sense if it did.
It would, and that would track with what happened subsequently. If not, the next death after that would have been when he was out on the hull and his hand gets torn off. I think that's the next one that we see.
That's one that we see, yeah. Interesting. Because, again, like I felt like this philosophically was an interesting question. And it seems, again, like the movie, different emphasis. Like, that's not what we're going to focus on.
Yeah, well, I think Director Bong was not as interested in the philosophical side of things. He was more interested, he's much more a practical person, maybe. He was interested in the sort of critique of modern capitalism, which is inherent in the book. And he was interested in the politics. And I was interested in the social commentary as well, but like I said, I'm more of a philosophical minded person maybe, and I really wanted to explore those questions more deeply.
So you mentioned before that interaction that you had with director Bong, and specifically you said chapter 19, correct, was the one.
Yep.
That was like your input on the script per se, but did you have other contact with director Bong as the production went on, or any was there a possible set visit, reading of the script, anything like that? I
did actually get to travel to Levingston Studios outside London where they were doing the filming and observe the filming, and I did get to read the script at that time. That was interesting because they brought me over, and then I was told I was going to do a bunch of interviews for sort of B-roll stuff for publicity, I guess. And they sent me a list of questions, and it was a bunch of questions about things that were happening in the script. And one of the questions was, what are your feelings on why Kai betrays Mickey? And my answer was, I have no idea who Kai is. There is no Kai in my book.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to let me read the script before I have to go do these interviews, because otherwise I'm going to sound really stupid. And I guess they just had not thought about that. Their production was very secretive, code names, and they made me sign this NDA, which is the most terrifying NDA that I've ever seen in my life. This NDA said that if any information leaked about the film or the script, I owed them, and it can be traced back to me, I owed them $5,000 for every individual who saw that information. So if something got on the internet, basically I owed them all the money on earth, and they could, chop me up and sell my organs to a cat food factory or something. It was scary. It was very scary, but I did. And so I had 6 hours to digest the script to get ready for these interviews. And so I did sort of speed read through the script and absorb it. But, they didn't obviously ask me my opinions on anything at that point about, do you want to change anything? At that point, it was director Bong's show, and he was going to do what he was going to do. The
set visit. What scene were they filming? Did you meet with some of the actors?
So the filming was the human printer scene, the very first one where Mickey's getting scanned. I don't know if you remember the scene where Gemma sort of leans over him and pops a pimple on his head right before he goes in the scanner. They spent about 5 hours filming that scene, just those 2 minutes on screen. About half the day that we were there was just filming that particular scene. And then they did a bit of Alan Manikova's scenes as well while we were there, which was fun. The scene where he's sort of smelling himself as he comes out of the scanner. It's extremely... I actually had a brief exchange with the actor who played Manikova afterwards, and I did compliment him. I wrote Manikova as a weird, creepy dude, and boy, you nailed it. You absolutely nailed it. You could not have done better with that role. It was really spectacular. That's what they were working on, and then we also got to tour around the set, because they did most of that. I don't know if you can tell or not, but most of that was practical effects. Most of that stuff was built, and so I got to actually clamber around, this stuff that I had described and sort of dreamed up in my head, and that was a really interesting experience for me. That was a once in a lifetime kind of thing. Director
Bong, did you meet him in person? And also Robert Pattinson, any interaction?
Yeah, I got to. I've got to spend a bit of time with Director Bong. He actually personally kind of toured me around the set. Again, I just can't emphasize what a nice guy he is. He's one of the most genuine, warmest people I've ever met. While we were walking around the set at one point, he actually reached over and grabbed a little piece of the scenery and tucked it into the back pocket of my pants and just leaned into my ear and said, "Just take it home. Nobody will notice."
Amazing.
He didn't need to do that. Again, that's just like a super nice thing to do.
What was it?
It was one of the test tubes that they were using, the scene where they were doing Manikova's thing.
Awesome.
It's just a little thing. It's just a knickknack. It's sitting on my shelf behind me right now.
Awesome.
And I don't know if you noticed, but when Manikova is arrested and they've got him holding up the mug sheets or whatever they are in front of him, it's the Ashton Police Department.
Oh, I missed that. That's a cool little reference.
He actually, I don't know if you can see that. He gave me it. This is like a very realistic detective badge for the Ashton PD that he gave me also while we were on set. And it's just like a nice thing to do that he had no obligation whatsoever to do.
For our listeners, he held up it looked like a sheriff's badge, but it said Ashton Police on it or something.
Yeah.
Very cool.
That's amazing. I was already so in love with this man, and it's great to hear that his actions are backing all of that up.
Oh, he's a fantastic person. Just a really, really genuine person.
So when we covered this, I think I encountered a story about you announcing it and maybe getting Robert Pattinson's name wrong, and some Twilight fans got mad at you. And I think you had said you hadn't seen Twilight. I told I'm in a book club, like a very big book club in Portland. It's got like 400 people in it. And the person who runs it, I was talking to them about it, and they had read the book and seen the movie. And that was the one question. I was like, do you have any questions that you would want to ask? So shout out to Shayna. Have you seen Twilight since then? And are you aware of the Robert Pattinson phenomenon? And what do you think about it now?
I have not seen Twilight, but I am very aware of the Robert Pattinson phenomenon. You mentioned I did, because at the time he was Batman. And the Riddler, I want to say, whoever was the villain,
Yeah.
Yeah,
His
Riddler.
name in the film was Edward Ashton. Like, that's weird. So like, Batman is going to be in a film that's written by Edward Ashton while he's fighting Edward Ashton. Like, it's just some dumb tweet that I put out, which
Mhm.
like at that time I could put things on social media and no one ever noticed. I had like 6 followers and it didn't matter. I could write whatever I wanted. And I did this and I wrote Robert Patterson instead of Pattinson.
Mhm.
Still to this day, that was the most retweeted thing I have ever
Oh no.
written. I was the villain of the internet for about a week. I got thousands of replies telling me what an imbecile I am because the greatest actor of our generation was going to be in my film and I couldn't even get his name right. I mean, people were so mad. Yeah, he's got a very dedicated fan base, Mr. Pattinson. He really does. Um, Interesting coda to that story. When I was at the premiere, I spent quite a bit of time hanging out with his mom and his sisters, who were also super nice people. And one of the first things she said was, "Yeah, don't worry about that. We actually thought about changing our name to Patterson because nobody could get it right. So don't feel bad that you couldn't get it right either. It's a very common thing. But his fans did eventually forgive me. We're all pals now. But it was a rough week or so.
That's so funny. So you mentioned that you went through all of Bong Joon-ho's filmography for the most part. Did you have a favorite that stuck out to you that you were kind of...
Well, as I mentioned, Okja I think is really brilliant in terms of both social commentary and kind of mixing horror with humor, which is something that I kind of like to do, as you can probably tell from my books.
Mhm.
That was a movie that I really vibed with. As a side note, it actually turned my daughter into a vegan for about a month and a half. So
I get it. That was, I think that was the goal, right?
it was impactful. It was an impactful film. So yeah, and Parasite's a masterwork. Obviously, Parasite's absolutely brilliant. But yeah, for me, Okja really is it's the closest to my heart.
Besides this one.
Well, yeah, obviously, yeah. Obviously, this is my all-time favorite moving forward.
Yeah. So this opens up, I think, talking about some of the differences more. And you've touched a couple times about the social commentary that he wanted to make. But as you highlighted, it is in your book as well. I think we touched on that in our review. I said I was kind of surprised at how little I was seeing people talking about capitalism and this being a critique on capitalism when I was reading the reviews of the book. Because I thought that was pretty obviously talking about a system where people are sort of chewed up and spit out and devalued. And that felt very tied to that to me. So then, knowing Bong Joon-ho's like history and what he likes to make films about, I thought, okay, maybe I could see like this is an element he wanted to develop, and I kind of expected it to be maybe more prevalent in the film adaptation. And I think I was right because I think that's very prevalent. Like you said, that's the emphasis of the movie. I think sort of primarily, and then we get Mark Ruffalo's Marshall character comes in and is sort of bombastic, over the top. Some people have said, kind of Trumpish in his ways. And it's a very direct social commentary on things that are going on right now in our country, but also I think around the world. What was your thoughts on that shift? And I don't know, how do you feel about it now, having that be the main takeaway from this story that is originally your story, but is now kind of a shared story with Bong Joon-ho?
Well, like I said, first of all, I'm pretty clear in my mind, at least, on the fact that the book and the movie are just they're two different things. They're two different art forms. They're two different works of art, and they don't exist in competition with one another. So I actually, as you can probably imagine, I got some nasty grams in my DMs after the movie premiered from people who were upset about it, particularly upset about Mark Ruffalo's performance, and I had one person say, "I wonder how you feel about director Bong ruining your book," and my answer is like, first of all, I actually love the film, so screw you, and also, like, even if I didn't. He didn't do anything to my book. My book is still here, and it's exactly what it was before. This is a different take on the same story, and it's a legitimate take on the same story. That being said, I think you got to remember this script was written in 2021, and the filming was all done in 2022. The sort of harmonic convergence with actual political events in our country is crazy. I mean,
Crazy.
it's particularly the assassination attempt.
That's what
Even
I
the
was telling
fact
somebody
that
about
even
that. I
the
can't
same
believe that.
side of Ruffalo's face.
I
that
can't believe it. So that
Yeah.
was filmed and done all before. Like,
Oh
I
yeah,
want to.
that was
Yeah.
in the can in 2022.
Wow.
When nobody even knew that Donald Trump was going to run for president again at that point, and it's absolutely crazy how things kind of. And I think unfortunately that controversy overshadowed a little bit of the message that is there in the film, because it wasn't really like the script was not written about Donald Trump. Right. That's not what Bong Joon-Ho was thinking about. That's not what he said that in interviews many times, and that's not what the script was about. But every work of art is a communication. It's a conversation between the viewer and the artist. And in this case, a lot of the viewers have got one thing on their mind in that conversation, and I think they're imprinting a little bit of that onto their interpretation of the film.
Is there like a vibrating or something happening?
There is a woodpecker outside the window.
I see. Okay.
Okay,
All right.
fair enough. Yeah, and that's a good point. I mean, his supporters wear red hats. They sort of look up to him as a messianic figure, despite any sort of indication that this is someone who deserves that sort of praise. There's a lot of direct, I think, corollaries for people who want to see Trump in this character.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Hard to avoid. And then that just gets exacerbated by what happens in the movie, feeling so one-to-one in some ways with what really happened. It's really mind-blowing that is something that was made before real events played out. But okay, we'll move away from that. Let's set that aside. I want to talk about the aliens a little bit, because that was one of the major differences I noticed as well, is the changes made to the aliens and how they were portrayed and sort of sold to the audience as something to care about. At first, they are quite alien and, for lack of a better word, and unusual to us, and sort of bug-ish and kind of gross. But I think especially when the baby ones get introduced, there's definitely an element of like making them kind of cute and adorable to where we feel an attachment to them. And then we get the scene where one gets like shot apart literally. And I think at that moment, everybody realizes, oh, I don't like this at all. I'm very sad now. And I felt like that was a very direct, like sort of emotional play to get the viewers to care about these aliens. But it was interesting in the book that I felt like yours was not done on that emotional level, and was more of like maybe like just a rational level of like, we should probably care about other beings, even if they are quite dissimilar to ourselves. And what were your thoughts on like the changes made to the aliens and the versions that we get in the film? Because towards the end, that's where a lot of the biggest departures really start to play out.
So one of the things that I wanted to play with in my book was the idea of who deserves the dignity of being considered a person, because things that we think of as people, we treat very differently than things we think of as things. And that doesn't just extend to other humans. I think most of us think of our pets as people. I certainly think of my dog as a person. I think of my cat as a person, but we don't think of a pig as a person. Most of us don't, or else we wouldn't be able to eat bacon, right? I mean, and a pig is every bit as smart and empathetic as a dog, probably more so if we're being honest with ourselves. But we make these distinctions in our head. And I wanted to make it necessary for Mickey in the book to come around to realizing that the creepers deserve that respect and deserve that dignity and should be thought of as people, but I wanted to make it hard. And so I started out with the creepers doing awful things. I mean, they really do kill a bunch of people early on. And we explain later why they kill them, and that they don't realize that what they're doing is wrong. But they do. They kill a lot of people. They kill a bunch of colonists in a colony that can't afford to lose people. And I made them more physically repulsive than what Director Bong does, because I wanted that leap for Mickey to be a difficult one, right? Like if you make aliens, you make them Ewoks. Everybody loves Ewoks. You know, you cuddle up with an Ewok in a second. They're
Looks
adorable.
like a teddy bear. Yeah.
I wanted to make it harder than that. I wanted to make it a leap. Director Bong obviously felt like he needed to bring the audience along. He needed to make it a little easier for them. I would assume that he felt that, and to be clear, I didn't talk to him about this topic, but I would assume that he felt that, as I described them, the audience wouldn't be able to get there. That it would be more like a Starship Troopers thing where they're just these horrible bugs, and yeah, we should kill them. And like they'd be more sympathetic with Marshall at the end and less so with Mickey. And so he made him a little more cuddly. And that might partially have to do with the fact that he was working with, a film is a much more limited in time and in volume of information than what you have with the book. I had 350 pages to develop that and to get Mickey where he needed to get to. Bong had 120 pages of script to do the same thing. And so he maybe needed to make the task a little easier for the characters and also for the audience.
So speaking of changes, the change from Mickey 7 to Mickey 17 and just that many other iterations of Mickey. What were your thoughts on the change there?
So there were two things about that. And I spoke to Bong briefly about this. He's talked about it in interviews as well. He wanted to do two things with that. First of all, I think he really wanted to emphasize that, in terms of critique of capitalism, dying was just like a routine part of this guy's job. And as he said in a couple of interviews, if dying is your job, you should do it pretty often, right? And so 7 is not enough. He wanted to do more. He also, there was a little more subtle thing he was doing there where, and this again is a departure, that the movie, I did not see this as a coming of age story. I pictured Mickey Barnes as a fully formed adult. And director Bong wanted to make it more of a coming of age story where Mickey 17 is more childlike and 18 is more of a man. And you can see that in the way that the characters are portrayed by Robert Pattinson on the screen. And 18 is sort of the symbolic age where we grant you adulthood. And so he wanted to have that transition from 17 to 18 because he said that's sort of where you're not a boy anymore.
I love that. Did not pick that up. And I can't wait to rewatch with that in mind.
It's a subtle piece, and it's not, he didn't really hit on it, but I think that was part of the
subtle
issue.
What about the sauces? What are your interpretation of that? Because Ilfa loves her sauces in the movie.
Yeah, that was 100% director Bong's thing. He gives his characters weird quirks.
Yeah.
I tend to write more everyman sort of characters. All my characters I try to make them the sort of people that like you could imagine meeting them on the street. Like even Marshall in my book, he's not a crazy person. He's not a lunatic. He's not a bombastic person. He's just he's got some wrong ideas for sure. But he's doing his best as he sees it to help this colony survive. He's a military leader who really feels a strong sense of duty. And that leads him to do some bad things, but it's not because he's a bad person. And I think, director Bong has I think he likes to paint more black and white characters maybe than I do. And maybe a little more, and I think maybe on the screen you have to be more black and white. Everything has to be more kinetic. Everything has to be more vivid on the screen than you can do in a book. So I think there's reasons why he did it that way. And this pulls away from, this is like Donald Trump, because clearly Ilfa is the driving force in this relationship, right? This is more like maybe like Perón or something. He said he modeled those characters after a number of different, like Ceausescu and Perón and a number of dictators throughout history, where it's been more of a partnership, right? With Ceausescu, the husband and wife, Nicolae and his wife, they were both sort of equal partners in the horrors that they inflicted on Romania, and I think he wanted to establish a dynamic of that sort with these two, and I think he accomplished that very well.
Well, speaking of ambiguity, watching it again last night, I was struck by that final scene again, or near the end, I guess, where we get this sort of vision or dream where Mickey is imagining the printer is still operational, Alpha's there, and she is printing out a new version of Marshall, and they have this whole confrontation about it. And then he sort of rejects it. He says, "You died," and it's kind of a horrifying sequence, kind of a little horror movie for a moment there. But he kind of rejects it, and comes back to the present of where he's about to hit the button, and he blows it up, and we end up having a pretty positive, sort of happy ending. And I on the rewatch, I kind of felt like, is this just like a glimpse of an alternate ending to this movie that maybe once existed? I don't know. And I'm curious if you know anything about this sequence, or if you just have a read on it and what you think it means, because it's not something that's present in your book.
No, that's the culmination of the coming of age arc. Because you remember, he goes through this scene and he's frightened, and then he says, "And I thought to myself, what would 18 do?" And that's when he says, "And that's when I wasn't afraid. This time I wasn't afraid." So that's him. That scene is him becoming a man. That's him stepping into 18's shoes and becoming a fully formed grown adult, which he really was not before. So that comes with the whole 1718 symbolism. Again, that's based on my reading of the script and my reading of the film. That is not based on any inside knowledge given to me by director Bong or anything like that. I have not discussed this point with him, but that was my interpretation of it.
Well, that's the cap on that for me now. I like that read on it, because I think there's a lot of stuff that you can pull from that, and I think that's what director Bong does well, is like he's playing with some of that ambiguity and leaving it to interpretation. I'm curious too, as far as the entire film, as it was being adapted, was there anything that kind of surprised you and blew you away, maybe exceeded expectations?
I thought it was going to be a tricky book to film just because there's so much thinkiness in it. It's a very, like I said, it's a very sort of philosophical book in some way. I mean, there's plenty of action as well, which translates to the screen. But there's a lot of sort of philosophical underpinnings to it that I thought were going to be difficult to film, and I was pretty impressed with the way that director Bong was able to work that in. And then the other piece is the world building. To make the action of the film make sense, you have to at least get an idea of what this society is and how society works. And in 350 pages, I can get that done. In a 120-page script, it's a lot tougher. Doing world building for science fiction without just using tropes in a film is really difficult, and there's not that many films that successfully pull it off. And I feel like he did I feel like the first act accomplished a lot of that in this film, and I feel like he did a really sort of masterful job of pulling that all together.
Absolutely love that. I mean, this was a really fun project for us to cover. Talking with you has really sort of filled in a lot of the gaps that we had and questions we had. I did want to ask, about other books you've written. I haven't read any of your other novels, but I'm curious if you have any others that you think would lend themselves well to a film adaptation. Now that you've been through this process once, do you have anything else that you're like, this one would actually work really well?
I mean, I feel like I write in a pretty cinematic way. I think all my books would make great film. We actually
Good answer. All of them.
we actually had some pretty serious discussions around my first novel, 3 Days in April, back in 2015, 2016. We had a director who was interested, and we went down a little ways down the road with him, and he never was able to pull the financing together, unfortunately, to pull the trigger. But I thought that could have been, I still think that could be a really fun project. My fourth novel, Mal Goes to War, was also optioned by Warner Brothers.
Oh, wow.
That it hasn't gone to production, but that's still, obviously somebody thought enough of it to put an option deal on it. I think that one also would make a really, really fun film. I really hope that one actually winds up going to production at some point, because I think you could have a really good time with it. And my newest book, The Fourth Consort, also, it's a little, I think from a film standpoint, might be a little harder sell because it has a lot of creatures. I got most of the characters. Those are only 2 human characters in that book. Everybody else is creatures of various sorts, which makes things tough. I feel like it'd make a great animated film, though. I feel like you could do, like one of those Netflix animated movies. I feel like you could do a really nice job with that. So, but like I said, I have a guy, Sean Daly. He's out there, pounding the street for me, trying to get people to bite on these things. So, I wish him all the success in the world. I hope that all works out.
Have you seen Scavenger's Reign?
Yeah, that's exactly what I thought, Luke. I immediately thought that.
I feel like in that sort of vein, my newest book might actually fit in that sort of mold.
Good pull. Any filmmaker specifically that you'd love to see adapt your work? Like anybody that you're a fan of course, but also like that might fit the style.
I'm really sorry to say I don't actually know that many filmmakers. I'm a book guy, I'm really very much a book guy. I'm not as knowledgeable about films as I probably should be. My best friend from high school and college is a cinemaphile, and he would be able to rattle off the 10 best directors to work with each one of my books with no problem. But that's his domain. That's a level of knowledge that he has that I don't have.
Well, nothing wrong with that. Yeah,
it's totally fair. Do you have any upcoming projects? You said you have a new novel. Is that new novel out, or is that upcoming? Yeah,
my newest book, The Fourth Consort, it came out in February of this year. So it's out in hardback right now, and Kindle and audio and all that other business.
I'll make sure to put a link to that in our bookshop, which will be in the show notes for the episode.
And my next book after that is already in production process with my friends at St. Martin's Press. So that one's due out in January of 2026. It's called After the Fall. So that's also a fun book.
So Antimatter Blues was a sequel to Mickey 7. Is there any planned additional novels in this, or is that the finale of the Mickey story?
I actually have a pitch for a third book in the Mickey series. So from a publishing standpoint, there's a basic assumption that each book in a series will sell only a fraction of the copies of the previous book in the series.
Yeah.
So publishers are typically reluctant to commit to a longer series until they see how the first book or the second book in the series have done sales wise. And so my editor has been reluctant to commit to a third book in this series for that reason. But like, the book's selling pretty good right now. So I think maybe I'm hopeful I might be able to nudge him around on for my next project to say, yeah, what about a third Mickey book? What do you think? So we'll see. I'm supposed to have those conversations with him in the next few weeks. So I am hopeful.
That's exciting. I love that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Glad to hear it.
All right. Well, I mean, that's going to be it for this episode. Is there anywhere you would like to share with our listeners where they can find you if they want to keep up with your work, find you online? Do you have any social platforms you're active on?
Yeah, I'm on all the social media platforms pretty much at Ed Ashton Writing. And if you go to edwardashton.com, that's my website. All the latest with my books and my short stories and stuff can all be found there.
Awesome. All right. We'll link all of that in the show notes for people. We encourage you to check it out. Thank you for coming on, Ed. This has been really fun, and it's been awesome to talk to you.
No, I really appreciate it. This was great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your time, Ed.
All right. Thank you again to Edward Ashton for coming on with us. That was a really fun conversation. I love doing these creative conversation episodes. They're really cool, kind of way to break up our normal coverage and get some more insight into the projects.
Yeah, I mean, having these people who've had their work adapted on, it's so fun. It's a joy. And if you want to check out some more of those, we have done a couple others. We did one with Ted Chiang. We did one with Paul Tremblay, both excellent episodes as well. And we also do the book to movie comparisons and everything like that. So check those out.
So while I still have you, coming up, we are getting into a quarterly project. We have one more thing we'll be doing in between, but coming soon, we're going to be doing one of our quarterly suggested projects from our community. And the way to do that, if you want to participate and suggest something for us to potentially cover, is you want to go to our Patreon. It's patreon.com/inktofilm. You don't have to be a member to suggest something. So what you want to do is to find the pinned post, which is our like master list of suggestions. And then you want to comment a book to film adaptation that you would like to hear us cover. And then make sure to like your own post and like any other posts that people might have done, any other comments people have done that you agree with, that you're like, ooh, that looks like one that I would also like to hear. And then what will happen is we'll select the 3 or 4 suggestions that get the most likes, and we'll put those into a dedicated poll that will go to our patrons, and that'll come out about a week later. But if you want to get those suggestions in, you have to get them to us by the 20th, which is only going to be like 5 days away at the point that this episode's coming out. So coming soon, make sure to get on there and leave us a suggestion, and that's the best way to get something that you would love to hear us talk about covered by us.
Yeah, and we love to have your input over there. It's just a cool way for us to engage with things that people want us to. You know, the audience has a voice here, and we love that. If you want to connect with us in other ways, we have Facebook, Blue Sky, TikTok, Instagram, all of the different social media platforms at Ink to Film. And if you want to join our Discord, we have a Discord. Send us a message on any of those platforms or inktofilm@gmail.com, and we'll send you the link.
And if you enjoyed this coverage, make sure to let us know in the form of a rating and review on whatever app you chose to listen on. And if you're on YouTube, make sure to like the video and subscribe to our channel. We're getting very close to 1,000 subscribers. Maybe we're already there by the time this comes out. Probably not, but we're getting close, and we'd love to have your support on there. Make sure to leave a comment. Let us know what you thought of our conversation. And Edward Ashton, we'd love to have the engagement.
All right. Well, again, I had a lot of fun with this. Please let us know in the comments if there's any other authors that have had their work adapted that you would like to see on, and then we could reach out to them and possibly have a similar conversation.
All right. That's going to be it for this week. So until next time,
keep adapting.